Ted Tucker was still working for the state. Somehow they tried to get that lease from Westminster, but they didn't succeed. Evidently, Westminster has more clout than the state does. They evidently have bigger. It's a big Presbyterian church in Detroit. And at one time, Reverend Fraze was the one that would, they had cottages, you know, for the kids to sleep in a big dining hall.
Like how many cottages are there?
I don't know anymore. I haven't been down there for years.
Oh.
And they had a tennis court, and it was a regular summer camp for kids from the church.
Sure.
And now it's a summer camp, but anybody can go, I think, that wants to pay the freight.
Sure.
And
Sure. Well, let's get back to your schooling then. Did you go to grade school out here at a little country school? Or?
oh no, Mama wouldn't let me go to country school. That was too much for the baby.
Oh.
I started in Roscommon.
Oh, did you?
Yeah.
How did you get into town every day?
Bus.
Oh, you had a bus already.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that would have been, you would have started like in 1929.
I started when I was 7, I think, because she wouldn't let me go. There was a school, you know, where you turn to go to Garish Park.
Yeah.
That school is on the left-hand side, that white
that
building.
corner.
That's where my sisters went to school.
What was the name of that school?
Sims School, was it?
Oh, yeah, because Olga Dipper
Mm-hmm.
talks about that. She went there.
And they had what they called the Galloping Goose, that the kids, the Zettel kids and my sisters rode in. And it was a pickup with a frame that was canvassed in the back, so in the wintertime, you know, and straw on the bottom, and that's how they went to school.
Who drove it?
What was his name? He
Probably
lived.
whoever owned it.
He lived on the corner, across from the school. Jimmy Dilly is all I can remember. I called him Jimmy Dilly, but I can't remember what his real name was. Anyhow, he lived there, and he drove the school bus. Whether he got paid or not, I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Well, so by the time you started school, then your sisters,
My sister was a senior when
she was in high school then, so she
Yeah.
was going into Roscommon anyway.
Mhm. Yeah. See, and they built a new school, what, in 39? 31. But the first, baby, the first half of the year they went into what is the old Masonic building. High school was on the top floor, and the grade school was on the bottom floor, and we had a little building out and back.
Your little outhouse?
You didn't go to the bathroom too much in the wintertime unless you really had to, I'll tell you. And then halfway through then, the school was ready to be built, so they moved the Masonic Hall across the road.
Mm-hmm.
But that's where I started to school, was there.
Okay, well that had to be something. So you went through that whole building,
Mm-hmm.
except for your one semester in
Yep.
Lansing. How many were in your class?
When we graduated, 18.
18. Great. Do you still have reunion?
Yeah,
Or you go to the one?
Yeah, we, 3 of the gals and I have lunch once a month.
Well, that's nice.
And Harold Scott, we've invited, but he never seems to make it. And of course, Jean Rutledge and Shirley Kiley live out west, so they don't. We had a reunion for our 50th. And
They came for that.
yeah, and
So who
but
are the 3 girls that you...
Marge Cisco Feldhauser, or Roper, excuse me, and Jean Fowler Feldhauser, and Martha Jansen Roper, or Austin. Her dad used to have something to do with the Mason building in through there. So did Jean's first husband. And we have lunch once a month.
Well, that's nice.
And we talk for a couple hours.
That would be a group to interview, wouldn't it?
Yeah. We talk about sending poor Martha out snipe hunting one time for a party. And when I stopped to think of it, though, I was a brat in high school. I really was.
When the war was on, what did that have effect on your schooling, do you think? It had
And
any effect?
at that time, none, really.
Did-
Except that I wrote to a bunch of servicemen, like Moreland Dutton and Jack Price and a kid by the name of Sullivan. And I probably wrote to 6 or 7 servicemen once a week.
Well, that's
But other
something.
than that, that was the only.
How many of the ones that graduated you went into the
We lost
war
one
then?
kid over the channel, Bill Gardner. And I don't know if the rest of them went into the service or not. You know, after you graduate and I moved away, you kind of lost track of everybody.
So when did you came back then, and when did you start to date Earl then?
Oh, let's see. We were married
Were
in
you-
47.
Were you a good student of his when you were, no?
He says, he always said that if it hadn't been for Dorothy Pavick and Kenny Ostling, I probably wouldn't have passed chemistry.
They helped you along, huh?
Dorothy and I were the only two in biology, though, that would cut frogs and do anything like that. The boys
What-
wouldn't.
What would they do? They refused to do it?
Yeah, and that was all right. Nobody made them do it.
No kidding.
Yeah.
Who was the biology teacher?
Who was that at that time? Shear? Who was it? Because Earl didn't come till I was a senior in high school.
Was he right out of college then? Was
No,
his
he taught
first
3
job?
years in Henderson, Minnesota.
Oh.
And he was a football coach in
How
Henderson.
did you hear about Roscommon? How did you happen to come?
Our superintendent was scouting for teachers.
Who was the superintendent?
Champion, EL Champion. And Earl always said that when he got off the bus, if it hadn't pulled away, he'd have gotten right back on again. Because in those days, he got off at what is the office impact now. It was the Ford Garage. And the streets weren't paved or anything. And it was a windy day, and the dust was a-flying. There wasn't a car on the street, you know.
Wow.
Because
That
until,
was in 41.
yeah, until the advent of snowmobiles and skiing, after Labor Day, the town died except for hunting season. I can remember the hunting season of 41. You couldn't walk, you couldn't drive a car down the street. It was packed with people.
No kidding.
Yeah, they had the Blue Ox and all of that.
Well,
We used,
tell me about the Blue Ox. I've heard people refer to it, but I don't really know what they
well,
do.
Paul Bunyan.
Right, but did somebody actually have a statue? Did they
Let's see,
make
did,
a wooden thing, or what
did
they
we
do?
have, I don't know. But it seems like we did, but I can't remember for sure. I was too busy having fun with the hunters.
With all those guys.
Well, you know, in those days, the young kids came hunting. Now, the older, well, they were young. Like me, they've grown older. But in those days, kids,
It was a young crowd.
yeah, like 20-year-olds, real young crowd. And they'd have a dance at the school, we called it the Hunter's Ball, and had an orchestra. No jukebox, an orchestra.
Live music.
Hmm. And that was your
Was
livelihood.
that a dress-up thing, or
Oh,
were
no.
they in their hunting clothes?
They had their hunting clothes, and you dressed in a skirt and sweater or something. And that was their livelihood, anybody that had a business, until spring. If you didn't make it in hunting season, you just kind of went broke. I always felt sorry for Bill Wagner when he bought the hardware store, because he bought it like in the fall. And of course, you know, there was hardly any business. I don't know how he made it that first winter. I don't, because in those days, you know, you didn't, as I said,
was
there,
nothing going.
no, nothing going.
So do you remember when they paved the streets?
No, I can't remember that. You know, it was just, they paved them one time. I don't know if it was when I was gone.
So you came back, let me see, you were down there at the, we left you at the, in Ypsilanti,
You see, and I came back, let's see,
when the war ended, you figured, in 45.
no, Butch was born in 45.
So what year did you marry? Did you and Earl get married?
47. See, Butch and Dave were not Earls. I had 2 boys before we were married.
Oh, okay.
And, but he adopted them, so and they were only like 2 and 3. So
You were
I,
born in 44 and 45?
45 and 46.
Okay.
And then Glenn was born in 52. Glenn was Earl's.
Okay, so you came back here
In,
with Butch.
Butch was,
born?
yeah, Butch was born. And I came back, and that's when my mother came back to help me with the kids.
Oh, okay.
Then I went down to Lansing and got a job. And Mother stayed and took care of the kids.
Oh, what kind of job?
I worked in the auto owners filing. Oh, I hate filing to this day. And
Oh, God.
then I worked at the school one year, the high school in the office. When I came home, Bill Ingleson got me the job at the office. And then,
Was he teaching there then? or
hmm
what?
and then in 47, of course, Earl and I got married, so I didn't work.
You got married here then?
Yeah, we were married in the Congregational Church when it was the Stone Church. And our reception was in the Spruce Lodge,
Okay, isn't that great?
and they had the,
There was a dining room.
yeah,
back then,
uh-huh, that's where our reception was.
Well, how nice. I bet it was a wonderful event.
Yeah, oh yeah. And let's see, a guy by the name of Carl Nash stood up, or was Earl's best man. Walked in the church and he looked around and he said, well, it hadn't fallen down yet. This is the first time I've been in here since Carl Carlson's funeral. But that was the way Carl was. He was a character. And Thelma Dutton was my matron of honor.
Okay. Was she married to Moreland by then?
No, she wasn't.
No.
That was a
She was-
good year. That was a good year. I got married. Thelma got married. Ella Logan got married. And somebody else who had been either widowed or divorced got married that year.
Well, how nice.
So, no, Thelma was divorced. And she and Marilyn got married that year, but I don't remember when.
Were you married in the summer?
Yeah, June.
Well, how nice. So then you've been here ever since, huh? Isn't that-
Been here since, well, when my father died, I was 16, and we, my mother built this house, and I lived in here until I went to, where did Lansing for that thing, and then I came home. And
So then when you and Earl were married, did you move, is this what the house that you
Mhm.
lived in?
Yeah.
Because you were already here with your mom and your
Mhm.
two boys.
I'll never forget. I was working, and so Mother was watching the 2 kids, and so Earl built a great big pen out there for them to play in, you know. God, it was all really a big one. They wouldn't play in it. They stood at the gate and cried all the time. Finally, we took it down.
Bless their little heart.
Oh, they were pistols. Oh, God. They were pistols.
Oh, for heaven's sake.
And, of course, Grandma spoiled them, like all grandmas do.
Sure, so she lived here with you until she died
Yeah.
in '88.
Mm-hmm.
What year did Earl die?
95.
95. So you only had 7 years here by
Mhm.
yourself. You're too newlyweds.
But then he was, you know,
He was
he had
well.
senile dementia
Yeah.
the last 5, 6 years, somewhere around in there. And actually, the last year was the year that he was, but he was no trouble. Everybody said, oh, I said, hey, if he'd have been that quiet when he was in his, before he got sick, I'd have been all set.
Yeah.
He was so easy to take care of that no matter what I,
That's good.
no matter what I told him to do, he'd do.
Mhm.
And the worst thing was he had such poor circulation in his legs. If he didn't keep them up, his legs would get almost black. and he always had a quilt around his legs because he was cold. And so he'd get up and he wouldn't take the quilt away and he'd fall down. So I'd take a chair over to him and he'd help himself up too. I'd help him and I'd be cussing and swearing at him and he'd be laughing at me. So, he was so easy to take care of.
Well, that's good. So all the years that he was teaching, then did you work?
I
work?
worked for Corky for 17 years.
Oh, did you?
Mm-hmm. I quit in '56 because I knew my mother was to the point where I was going to have to start taking care of her.
You didn't help.
And because she would fall down, she'd lose her balance. And I understand it because I do the same thing now. And the doctor says it's one of the things that comes with age at you. And all the time she fell down, she never hurt herself. She'd get black and blue, but one time she fell outside and hit her wrist on the side of the sidewalk and got a real hairline fracture in her wrist. But other than that,
So she did well.
yeah.
So when you were growing up out here, how often did you go into the village? Did you go always to Roscommon to get supplies, or would you
Grayling.
go to Grayling?
The A&P store in Grayling.
What kind of car did your father have?
Oldsmobile, always.
Did he buy them new?
Mm-hmm, from a man in Ernie Moore in Bay City.
Oh, for heaven's sake.
Well, and
Did
then,
you ever take the train down? Back and
no,
forth?
yeah, a couple of times, and we stayed at, oh shoot, what's the name of that hotel? Anyhow, they had a big Negro chef, and I was fascinated by him. I don't know how old I was, just old enough to remember him.
Mm-hmm.
And he made a big fuss over me
At the hotel?
at the hotel because I had, curls.
Mm-hmm.
And I was little. I had curls.
Were you going to basically to visit people or
Chicken
what?
show. My dad
Chicken
raised
show.
chickens
Oh, tell
to
us
show.
about that.
Yeah, and he had partridge Plymouth Rocks, and he'd take the roosters mostly, and he got cups someplace for prizes.
Oh, for
And we were
heaven's
friends with Schaefer's, who owned the cottage next door here to us.
sake. Mhm.
And Mr. Schaefer, the old man, and so he raised chickens too. And we were friends with some people by the name of Jarman, so we'd go down and we stayed at the hotel. And I can't remember going to the chicken show, but I must have, but I don't remember.
So while
but
he was in charge of forestry and nursery and all that, he was raising chickens.
uh-huh, yeah, we
on
always
his
had,
own.
yeah. I
Did
remember,
you sell the eggs?
no, we always used them for,
Oh,
he
when
didn't
you were
have that
cooking
many
for all those
chickens.
people.
Hmm?
You were cooking for all those men, too.
Well,
by the
yeah,
way.
but he didn't have that many chickens. He had just had, I don't know, maybe a dozen or two, somewhere around, not enough to, but the roosters were his pride and joy because I don't know if you've ever seen a partridge Plymouth Rock rooster, but they have, I call them iridescent tail feathers.
Oh.
They're like blue, black,
Were they just running loose in the
Oh
yard
yeah,
then?
oh yeah, but they were up on the hill. The chicken coop was on the hill up here.
Mhm.
So they didn't usually get down into the yard.
Mhm.
And then at one time he fenced it in. He had some by the garage, but that was fenced. And he had this little banty rooster. This friend of his in Bay City gave him, and that banty rooster would fly at him every time he came into the pen. But he always wore high-top laced leather boots, so the rooster never hurt him, but he would fly at him every time he walked in that pen. But I remember Don Lance, he got so mad at Don Lance. Lance's lived next door to Zettles at one time for a while. And Don was quite a fisherman, and he tied his own flies. And he took some of the tail feathers from one of my dad's roosters.
He was in trouble.
And we had a dog that just hated Don, and we've never had an ugly dog except for this one. And she hated Don, and she'd chase him out of the yard every time he came in.
That's fun. Those are fun memories. Though.
Yep.
Yeah. Well,
But we always shopped in Grayling.
did you?
Uh-huh.
Now, did you continue being part of the First Congregational Congregation? Did you go to church
You
there?
didn't have to go to church then to
No.
be married there.
You just were
Uh-huh.
married there, but you weren't really.
I can't
got
even
to
remember who the minister was. Isn't that terrible?
Oh, that's all right. Do you remember going to did you go to town to go to the theater or anything like that when you were growing up?
I went to Grayling.
To Grayling?
I don't think they had one at that time.
Okay.
Actually, we didn't do much in Roscommon until after I was growing, and graduated from school. When I was going to school, of course, I was there.
What kind of activities, with school activities, were available to you?
Oh, I was a cheerleader, and we played intramural basketball.
Oh, did you?
Yeah, and we went, of course, to all the track meets and the games, and then where the gym is now in the middle school, they had a skating rink.
Oh,
And
outdoor skating.
An outdoor skating rink. So we used to skate in the winter time and play tennis in the summer because they had tennis courts there.
Mm-hmm. Do you remember the Galmer house sitting on the corner there yet?
No, I can't remember sitting. I can remember.
'Cause
Yeah, where the garage is, where the. No, that wasn't there. That's the one that's back there.
It would have been on that front corner, if I understand correctly, where it was. Like kind of across from the attorney house.
Yeah, that's right. Because the Masonic Hall set back here, and the Gilmer House set up here. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Well, by the time you went to school there, it probably was no longer a boarding house. It was
No,
only a boarding house till 31. Did you have any classes in that building?
Gilmore House,
No.
just in Masonic Hall. Edith and Barbara lived there when I went to school.
Oh, did they?
Yeah. What was his name?
Byron.
Byron Barber. Yeah, they lived there when I went to school.
Well, that was good. Well, I'm trying to think what else I wanted to ask you about.
And of course, the post office was on the corner where the Nancy's got her
Radio shop.
radio shop.
So your family bought groceries in Grayling, so were you familiar with all the stores in town?
Yeah, where we're right by the railroad tracks, that used to be Chase's store. This side of the river, it's boarded up, it's not being used now. Soapsack lived upstairs.
Right, that was Chase's.
That was Chase's, and they used to buy bubble gum in there until my mother told them to stop selling me bubble gum because it would make my mouth all.
Uh-huh.
And then the telephone office was that little building between between the dollar store and Chase's. That was the telephone office.
Oh, okay.
And the operators used to stay there at night. And then McConkey's, of course, has always been McConkey's as far as I can remember.
Mm-hmm.
And let's see, what was that next building? And at one time, the A&P store was where
Where the official
Official is. And at one time, the Masonic Lodge was upstairs in that building, and it was called Sly's. It was a grocery store before the A&P. It was an old store. The A&P store built a new brick building. It was a
It was a wood building.
wood building before that. It was Sly's.
2 stories.
2 stories, and the Masonic Lodge was upstairs.
Oh, no, I don't remember anyone saying that before.
And of course, over where I can't ever think of them, Knights of Columbus, I call them.
Where's St. Vincent's at?
Yeah, St. Vincent's is. That was they used to play basketball in that old store on the on the upstairs.
Yeah, that was the Opera House. They said
Yeah.
that burned in 29.
And,
Do you remember that burning?
mm-mm,
That would have been when you first
Yeah.
started to go to school there, or even before you started to go to school there.
I think Andy Price was at the Opera
On the
House.
bottom. The store was on the bottom.
Yeah,
Opera
and
House was on the second
they used to
floor.
play basketball up there, and well, and then they used to go by train to Grayling to play basketball, to practice even. And
So when Earl came here, was he a coach right away?
he had football. Well, in those days, you had everything. You had football, basketball, track, and everything when he first came here.
Baseball too.
Yeah. When he came from the service, then he helped with football. They had a football coach when he came from the service. And he had baseball and track, I
Did he
believe,
come from the service?
back here.
When did he go in?
He went in, he was gone 3 years. He came back in 47, let's subtract. He went in 44, 45, somewhere, 44. From school, he was drafted from school.
Oh, okay.
And he was in 3 years, and then when he came back too.
Then he got married.
And
So what year had he come here? Oh, when you were a senior, you said he came.
mm-hmm.
Well, that is very, that is good. So,
So he came in 41, and then back in 46.
okay, back to, your father died when you were just 16.
Mm-hmm.
Whatever happened to your Uncle Michael then? Did he live here till he was an older man?
Oh, yeah, he lived until he was 94. They moved, he and my aunt, it got to the point that I put a telephone in for him. They wouldn't use it. My aunt fell, was it my uncle or my aunt fell? And the neighbor found him. Ivan Willett was their neighbor. He found him. But they wouldn't use the telephone, so I had it taken out. And it got so Uncle Mike wouldn't drive anymore. He was smart. He gave up driving on his own because he couldn't see well enough. And so it got to the point where we knew they couldn't take care of themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And if Mother had probably could have moved in with them and helped them, but we moved them over here. They lived with us for, geez, I don't know.
Both of them?
Mm-hmm.
What was his wife's name?
No, it was his sister,
Oh, his
Mary.
sister.
Uh-huh.
Oh, your Uncle Michael, was he not married?
No. My aunt had been married, but nobody knew her. They always knew her by Mary Wargle, and it was Mary Greacher was actually her name. Her husband was killed after they'd been married a couple of years. He was something in a factory, and he fell, and so she was only married a couple of years.
Okay, so your mother had a brother Michael and a sister Mary.
Mm-hmm.
Were there more children?
There was another brother, and I can't think of what his name was, but he was sick, and he died when he was only 40-something. And there was another sister, Anna, and she never came with them. She stayed in Ohio.
Okay. So
And I don't know what
probably raised
happened.
her family there.
I don't know what happened to her. I know we had a cousin called Millie, but other than that, I don't.
So there were actually 5 children in your mother's family.
Yeah, evidently. Yeah, that's right.
Anna and
Uh-huh.
Mary.
Yeah, and my mother and the 2 boys,
and
yeah.
Michael and that was
Mhm.
So which Michael died at age 94, your grandfather or your uncle?
My uncle.
Oh, okay.
I don't know how old my grandfather was. I could go out to the grave and look
Are they all, where are they buried?
in the old part of the cemetery.
Which,
Roscommon.
Higgins,
Mm, Higgins.
the one in town?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay.
Oh, Aunt Mary and Uncle Mike were out in Higgins, or Garish Cemetery.
Oh, okay.
But the rest of
So
them,
your grandparents, where are they buried?
I don't know where my grandmother's buried, frankly.
Oh, where's your grandfather buried?
He's buried out there. in
Higgins.
in Roscommon,
Mm-hmm.
and my mother and dad are buried there.
What did your grandfather do when he was not able to make a living with that farming when they came here to homestead?
Well, I guess they struggled, and I really don't know what he did.
Oh, okay.
I know my Uncle Mike worked in the WPA, but that was in later years.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know, they probably did anything they could
Mm-hmm.
to.
Did you say your mother was how old when she came here?
Well, I would.
Did she go to school here at all?
Mm-mm.
No. Okay. That's okay. I just was wondering if she would have gone to a country school up there.
No, that's something you don't even think about as
Yeah.
growing up, and they're there. And
Sure.
the only reason I know how they got here was because I heard, they were cussing out Les Helen all the time.
I imagine they were.
Because of this.
I wonder what they paid that guy for all that land.
Oh.
How did he acquire it?
I really don't know if he bought it up on tax sale or what,
Huh.
but he was a wheeler and a dealer, that was for sure.
Did they meet him personally? Did he come here often?
Well, I don't know. I met his son, but I don't remember if I ever met the old Les or not. Probably did, because I heard my dad cuss him out and off.
Oh my gosh, isn't that something? Well, I think you've given us a good feel for what it was like to grow up in this area.
Oh, it was beautiful.
Yeah.
It was just gorgeous to grow up in this area.
Then did you feel bad when the state park kept becoming larger and larger and more people came, or it just kind of happened?
It's a nice park. It's a family park. If it had been like the South Unit State Park, I might have felt worse. But this has always been sort of a family-oriented park, and the people don't give you any trouble. Except 2 or 3 years in a row, we had a bunch of kids camp over there, and their radios were going night and day. And they were really, well, I call them hippies, They were really, and the beer cans were stacked up like this. I was afraid to go to the lake and walk by their camp, really. And the last year they were here, they chased a gal bare naked through the park and up through by the fire lane up by Westminster there, and they had all the sheriff's departments and the state police and everybody here, and they never came back. Earl always figured it was college kids at the end of the college year that got together, but they never came back. Of course, I'm sure they were told they couldn't come back. But this is, other than that, this has always been I kind of hate to see it, that you can't park on the lake shore anymore. And I hate it that you can't get to the water half the time for walking over people. And so I don't even go swimming. I wasn't swimming last year at all.
That's the first year you didn't swim?
Yeah, because you go down and you're dodging a frisbee or a ball or something all the time, because the designated swimming area is closed off, but it's so full of people. And then those darn road runners come so close to the boys that you wonder sometimes they're gonna,
jet skis out in the water.
that they're gonna come through. So it's no fun to swim it anymore. You used to be able to go leisurely swim and not worry about getting hit there, and all you hear is the motors and the lake. The DNR is letting these big boats on the lake, and they shouldn't. They belong on the Great Lakes, not on Higgins Lake. They're ruining Higgins Lake, and I don't know why they're allowing them to do it. But they are, and they're ruining Higgins Lake.
I agree.
It's still a beautiful lake, but you know what's going to happen. in a number, 100 years from now, it may not be. I'm glad Lyon Township has gotten some people to pick up their garbage. I understand it isn't as bad this year as it has been. And
Are you in Lyon Township?
no, we're in
You're-
Crawford County,
Beaver Creek.
Beaver Creek. Yeah, yeah.
Well, that's all right, but you're in our school district then.
Mhm. We voted to have. For years, we went to Roscommon, and nobody ever said anything. And then Emma T. Wiseman,
To vote, you mean? You went to Roscommon to vote?
no, to school.
Oh, to school.
Yeah, and we belonged to Beaver Creek. They had a school, and we should have gone to that country school. After high school, you could choose whichever one you wanted because Beaver Creek didn't have a high school. But while you were in grade school, you had to go to this Beaver Creek out here. Well, old Emma T. Wiseman discovered that we weren't in the district, so we were supposed to pay tuition. Well, I don't know how Holtz and Earl worked it out somehow, but and then so we voted. My mother and my sister were 2/3 of the landowners, and that's all they had to have to petition Crawford County to annex us to Garish Higgins. And then why they didn't do the upper 40 at that time, I have no idea. But they only did the lower 40. Of course, there was nobody at that time on the upper 40. And then when Glenn got married and built his house up there, and they had Trevor, we had to petition to do that, and we didn't have any problems with it. But they kept charging us, what was it? How we discovered something. They didn't put us in Garish Higgins School District for years. The tax people kept us in Crawford County. And just before we got to go on vacation one time, they called and said something about we owed an additional amount of money because, and Earl said, well, check at the school. Polly will show you. Well, we had a hard time getting it straightened out. We finally got it straightened out. But for years, they still had us in Crawford County.
School district.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. Well, anything else that you remember from the village, or? I think you gave us a good history of this area and what your father did here.
Yeah.
How long did that nursery, was that active then after your father died?
Oh, let's see. Ed was there for quite a while. Vorgy was. Probably. I would think maybe 10 years, because Brigham's were at the nursery after Ed retired. Paul Brigham.
Was that Byron's father?
Mm-hmm. And they were different.
Well, they were still state employees, though.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So the state just finally decided there was no longer a need for all that, or you know how that?
I don't know. Well, they quit reforestation mostly. You know, the forestry's.
Probably had completed what they wanted.
Yeah, the forestry's most of them had shut down by then. And when the people retired, they never replaced them. And so I don't think the nursery shipped a few trees after that, but not on the scale that they used to.
And they always were just for our state. They never shipped
No.
out of state.
Not to my knowledge.
Well, that is very interesting.
They were just for our own foresters, or
So, from your mother and dad, actually, with Betty's children, there are still quite a few in the area.
Yeah, see, I have a niece, two nieces that live on King Road. Carolyn, when Bob died, sold their place, and so I gave her a couple of acres, and she put modular or whatever you call those things on it.
Oh.
And my other niece lives in one of the houses that my brother-in-law built
Uh-huh.
that they didn't sell. But, and of course my son lives up on the hill. And I have a niece that lives over on Fletcher Road.
So
Our
you
Military
have-
Road, excuse me, and her 2 kids live over there too.
So there's actually, from your grandpa and Grandma Wargo that came, you're down to the 5th generation of people here now. Because then it would be your mother, and then you, and their children, and they have grandchildren
Mm-hmm.
that are here.
Yeah.
Oh, great. That's great. See, you're just an integral part of our
Oh, yeah.
community.
Oh, yeah. I walk down the streets of Roscommon and I think, what town am I in? Because I don't know anybody. I go to Traverse City, I see more people I know than I do in Roscommon.
Yeah,
It's,
all that happens.
it really is.
There's a lot of new people here. That's why it's important that we try and get the history of some of this, because
I-
few of us know
Yeah.
how that all came about.
Well, see, there used to be a gas station on the corner where the eating place is now.
Subway.
Subway before, and then Arv's Market was there. And there was a hardware store that burned where Bradley's.
Bradley is.
And then the A&P store was there at one time. There was a barber shop there. And Bombs, of course, has always been there.
Yeah.
It was a doctor's office at one time. And he
Disney Soda Home gave us a nice history of that.
Did
I heard
she?
tape.
and he committed suicide in there. And I don't know, you could still see the bullet hole for a long time.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
In
And
the ceiling or what?
yeah, in the, yeah.
In the wall.
Mm-hmm. And he was a drunkard is what he was. And
Well, I think you've done very well. You,
I can remember our buses had one seat down the middle, you know.
oh, and then you faced the outside.
And no,
inside.
then you had seats along the edge, or along the side like you do now, but there was one seat just down the middle that didn't have any backs or anything on it.
Oh, just a bench like.
Just like bench, uh-huh.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay.
We used to, Elmer Soderholm was our bus driver, and when we got to his house, there were just a few Zettel kids and Ann Carlson and Lillian Johnson left on the bus, and myself. And every once in a while, he'd stop at his house, and his mother would have just baked cinnamon rolls.
Oh, my goodness.
And
Now, that would never happen today.
no, and we'd have
You'd
coffee.
have a treat.
We'd have coffee and cinnamon rolls,
Oh, isn't that neat?
and
That's the house that Mike and Sue Glover have now,
Mhm.
what you're talking about.
hmm
Well, that's great. Well, and you certainly enjoyed, did you swim most every day? when you
Oh,
were growing
Lord,
up?
I was out at 9 o'clock in the morning and come home maybe for lunch and then go back again. We used to dive off in the Westminster's, the lower one, not the top one. I went off on that once, and that was enough for me.
I bet you were a good swimmer.
Not really. I never learned to swim correctly. Up here, you just learn. When I learned to swim, we had a raft out here ourselves. And I jumped off in the raft, and Mother and Ed Zettel were out there, and I dog paddled to them. And that's how I learned to swim. But we'd swim from the high dive to the raft, and then back, and then we'd dive off in the raft, and then back to the high dive. And we were out there all day long. Then when Westminster came out at 4, we had to leave, of course. So then we'd go home. But other than that, I spent most of my summers at the lake.
Wow. Did your father fish much?
Yeah, he was a fisherman. He was an ice fisherman, and then in those days you could spear with a boat, you know. And what did they use? Kerosene for the lamp or something. And he speared a big pike like this at one time. And yeah, he was a fisherman, and that was when you could get perch and And
So you ate fish fairly often.
yeah, perch. Yeah.
Did you hunt too? Did you hunt the deer?
No, no, never hunted. No. Mm. Rabbits and fox, but never deer.
Then, did you know many people, like over by Lion Manor, did you know any of those families that lived there?
Hyslips and
Well, tell me about the Haight.
well, let's see. How many were there? I can't remember now.
Well, John, that book that was written, that Beulah Land book about that Bessie was a Haight that married Mr. Kellogg.
Oh, well, see, I guess I
Have you
just
read
knew
that
the
book?
name maybe. No, I haven't.
Oh, you can enjoy it.
And, what was the guy's name that,
It was John. One of the brothers she talks about was John Haight.
I'm trying to think of who was the one, Otto Decker, yeah, that owned the store at one time there, that
At
store.
Lion Manor.
At Lion Manor. And I can remember we used to have dances every Saturday night over at the school, which was the township hall or something. And Roy Frazier played the drums. Somebody else played the fiddle. Otto Detter played the fiddle. And I forget who played the piano.
Well, that had to be fun.
It was.
Did your mother and dad, everybody went?
Oh, yeah. We used to have dances at our house in the big dining room, too. Mrs. Suttle used to play the piano, and some guy from Frederick played the drums, and somebody else played the fiddle. Well, my dad made home brew. And if you could still walk down the basement stairs after you had the home brew, because that's where he kept it, then he'd put more sugar in it. And he always made ginger ale and root beer for us.